Hello, and welcome to episode 55 of Things I Learned from Barry Harris. Today I thought we would spend the episode just discussing chord melodies for the guitar, because people ask me all the time about applying the sixth diminished to chord melodies and how you'd use it. And it's kind of a complicated question, but I'll show you how I break it down in my head, and maybe it'll help in the future for anybody else coming up with chord melodies. I thought we would use the standard called Alone Together, which is in D minor, which the first couple of changes are D minor for a measure, and then E minor 7 flat 5 for 2 beats, A7 for 2 beats, repeated, E minor 7 flat 5, A for 2 beats, then D minor again for a full measure. Then it goes to A half diminished to D7 for 2 beats each, and then G minor 6 for 2 measures. So we'll just do that much. You have to know what the melody is, and the melody for that tune is and that's how far we'll do. Now you're going to need to know some basic things. The first basic thing you're going to need to know is, for the first chord, is D minor 6. You have to know everything that's involved in D minor 6. So you have to know all your D minor 6s in drop 2 voicings. And if you don't know what that means, it means 4 consecutive strings. And I have previous episodes where I've shown minor 6 diminished in drop 2s. You also should know it in drop 3, which would be play a note, skip a string, play 3 strings. You should also know it in drop 2, drop 4, which is play 2 strings, skip a string, play 2 strings. So all those things you should know. You should know all those things. That's prerequisite. That's just for chords. The other thing you should know how to do is you should know obviously your scale. You should know your scale in thirds. You should know your scale in sixths, I say. You should know your scale in octaves, and so on. You should know your scale in tenths. You should know all those little things you should know how to do. Now, where this comes in. So the first part of the song is, there's the melody note. So let's say we play a nice D minor 6 there, which makes sense. But we could also just do thirds. Which is pretty too. Or we could just play. There's already our G minor 6. Because the next change after you do D minor 6 is E minor 7 flat 5 to A7. Now the E minor 7 flat 5, Barry calls G minor 6. That's part of the G minor 6 diminished scale, which then you have to know all of your G minor 6s in drop 2s, drop 3s, drop 2, drop 4. You also have to know that scale up and down, in thirds, and so on, in sixths, in tenths, the whole idea. Now that helps because the first part of the song says, now that next melody note is already G minor 6. Change it to the diminished. So now we got now all those D minor 6 diminished, D minor 6, and even here is going to be the diminished that goes with G minor 6. So now let's do that. there's one idea of doing it. Another idea, maybe you might want to do chords the first time, the second time maybe you want to do sixths. So maybe so there's a lot of different ways to approach it. How about if we just, Barry does this thing sometimes where you stay on a note and then you just come down the scale. So that scale, obviously I'm coming down D minor 6. But I'm going to keep this note constant. So now I'm going to say, which is really pretty. So let's try that. Now I'll do the same thing. That's for G minor 6, so I have to do exactly the same thing for G minor 6. G minor 6 scale is this. So I might say. Now let's see if I can put that together in time. 1, 2, 3. So let's try to do also borrowed notes. Borrowing notes is pretty too. So if you take a look at some borrowed notes, let's say even for the first chord, instead of just making it D minor 6, a plain D minor 6 with a drop 2, there's a diminished below the D minor 6, which is part of the scale, which is the C sharp diminished. So maybe I'll borrow the B flat for the B. So instead of saying, maybe I'll say, and then maybe I'll add some thirds to it. So that's nice. Now even here, climbing the scale, those 3 chords. What if I wanted to borrow a higher, again D minor 6, so now I'll borrow this again. Let's borrow that B flat again, but now I'm going to borrow it here, so now it's going to be here. That chord is out, but it sounds good. So let's see, wait. And then, so if I continue borrowing that note all the way, there's the first chord. Now the second chord is supposed to be a diminished, but I'm still borrowing, I'm going up the scale using that same borrowed note, so now I have to borrow the note from the D minor 6 for the diminished. So I have to borrow the note from this chord, which would be a B natural. That's the second chord. There's a D minor 6, and there's the diminished above it. So now I'm going to be borrowing, for the B, I'm going to be borrowing the C sharp. So that sounds like this. Instead of just this, I'm going to do this. So now it's almost, there's a little bit of tension there. And the same thing here. This is supposed to be the diminished for the G minor 6, but instead of playing the full diminished, maybe I'll just borrow those 2 notes, or maybe I'll borrow these 2 notes. Maybe I'll just play 10th, so let's see what that sounds like. And then, so that's on my, so this is where I run into a problem, is because the idea of coming up with a chord melody is very important, because then it's, when you're playing a gig, doing solo guitar, or even playing with a trio or something, you have yet that bass together, okay? You have that arrangement together. But what Barry's system allows you to do is to improvise within all those chords and that chord structure. So if you really know your 6th diminished well, which I'm really working on doing myself, you should be able to come up with different ways to play the same chord melody all the time. Now, some of them are going to be prettier than others, and some of them are going to be hipper than others, but it's the concept of being able to improvise with the chords, which is really pretty. So in a way, for me personally, it's kind of a drag to come up with, okay, here's my arrangement of this song, this is it, this is how I play it, and now every time I play it, I'm just going to run out this duplicate way that I play it all the time, which is fine, and believe me, I do it. I have to do it, but there is a little part of me that says, oh man, wouldn't it be great if every time I play this tune, I could play, I could be just as fulfilled playing it because I'm looking at it in a new way. And just using basically those same chords, the D minor 6 diminished or the G minor 6 diminished. We didn't even really talk about what you could do for A7. We didn't really talk about what you could do for D7 or even A half diminished. We didn't really get to that. That starts C minor 6 diminished, which is the same idea. You have to know all those things for C minor 6. You have to know the chords in drop 2, in drop 3, in drop 2, drop 4. You have to know the chords in thirds, in sixths, in tenths, and so on. And so you see, it's limitless. All of us could know the chords to this and each get 8 bars to play, and every one of us could play a different thing. Would definitely play something different, but they would all, I'm sure, be beautiful, all of them, because this scale and this system, it's almost impossible to mess it up. And believe me, I've tried to mess it up, and it's almost impossible to mess up. It's almost impossible. So that's just a little window into how at least I perceive Barry's ideas for how to work on a chord arrangement or a chord melody for guitar. I hope it was helpful, and we'll talk soon. Thanks again for watching episode 55, which would be ways to use the minor 6 diminished in a chord melody. Thanks again. Until next time.